Yeah. It's still, dude. It's too hot. That's literally why. I can't think in this heat.
Yeah, the entire digital network is just melting on the Northeast right now. It is miserable outside.
Seriously. But anyway, I'll go back to the introduction. So, what's up, everybody? This is Andrew Erickson here from the Full Press Coverage Fantasy Football Podcast. And today, he's already kind of introduced himself a little bit, but today we're joined by Ryan Whitfield. Ryan, say hi to the people.
How's everyone doing tonight? Excited to be here. Thanks for having me on, Andrew.
Yeah, no, excited. I'm glad that you were able to hop on. I had a spot open up, and I wanted to talk some fantasy before we celebrate our great country's birthday tomorrow. So the subject for tonight's show is going to be focusing on looking at the ADPs of the top 5 players, essentially, at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end positions. And then us then looking at, okay, so outside those guys in the top ADPs, who can we kind of insert into their, end of projections at the end of the season? Who do we think can kind of get into that top 5 at each position? So I have a couple of names, and I know you've come prepared with a couple of names as well. But before we get into that, Ryan, are you working on anything, any NFL-related stuff? I know you were doing some stuff with the Orioles, with baseball. I know you do some of that stuff too, but what are you kind of working on right now?
Yeah, so right now, as far as NFL, because, I am doing some Orioles coverage for Fantasy Pros and then writing cover Mississippi State at SB Nation. As far as NFL, I'm mainly focusing on just really putting together luckily, being a writer for Fantasy Pros, I have access to some of the back end stuff. So I'm putting together kind of my top list right now, my draft boards and my draft info, and I'm just really focusing on pumping out content on Twitter, and you can find me at Ryan Whitfield NE. And then obviously the Football Garbage Time podcast, which you can find on Twitter at FB Garbage Time. But as far as NFL articles right now, as you can attest to, going through it a couple. Probably about a month or two ago now, the Pro Football Focus trial period is quite daunting. So that is, if I'm not pumping out some of the stuff that I'm currently writing for, I'm really focusing on that Pro Football Focus trial. So until that's official, or until I have a decision one way or the other on that, I'm just really trying to kind of put my fantasy football boards together at the moment. Yeah,
no, I can attest to the Pro Football Focus. It is a rather daunting task, the trials that they put you through. But keep grinding, keep chipping away at it. That's the best thing, and just got to get it done, and just kind of grind. I went through it, and there were some early mornings for me and some really late nights doing it, and there were times when I wanted to throw my computer out the window. But but I was able to persevere, and now I am, for those of you who don't know, so I am now a base data analyst for Pro Football Focus. So that's something I'm going to be doing during this season. So I'm not sure if I'm going to be doing college games or NFL games yet. Honestly, it'd probably not be a bad thing to do college games, because that way I can probably watch more of the NFL games. I'm not as into college football as I am into the NFL. And that way, that could probably help me do some scouting on my own, because for the most part, my college game is not up to par with my NFL knowledge, so it's definitely good to get some extra exposure into some of the players coming into the league, for sure. So Ryan, I will.
That's a product of living in the.
Oh yeah.
I was just gonna say that's a product of living in the Northeast. We have BC and UMass locally, so I'm the same until I started writing for SB Nation, and until I started really doing. I do like some basic draft coverage in the spring and April, where I basically cram on watching as much tape as possible for 2 or 3 weeks, but I do not watch college football regularly, and I think that might be changing for me at this point. But I'm right there with you. It's pretty much NFL, so it's kind of interesting to get exposure on the other side of the college game now.
Yeah, no, for sure. I know that we had Andre Williams he went to BC, right? And then there was Tajay Sharp. Tajay Sharp went to UMass.
Yes, Tajay Sharp, yep.
I was really into him when he first, when he had that, it must have been like a Roto World blurb about him. And he was like, Tajay Sharp, he's going to be the guy. And now it's like, He's just totally off the spectrum. But yeah, so let's get into some of these guys going into the top 5. So obviously, these players you're high on. That's why you picked them to finish in the top 5. So we'll start with the quarterback position, and I will review. So the top 5 ADPs right now, based on what the knowledge that I was able to, gather. So the top 5 quarterbacks right now going in drafts are Aaron Rodgers, Deshaun Watson, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, and Cam Newton. That seems about right. There's really no surprises there. So obviously eliminating those players, Ryan, who's a player that you think could enter in the top 5 at the quarterback position?
Yeah, so probably as noted by the Twitter poll I have up right now, I was digging deep today into strength of schedule and looking into opponents, players they're going to be playing. Started off in the running backs, but then kind of just expanded that when I found out I was going to be on the show today with you. So that was one thing I really wanted to look at. And so the name that really stuck out to me was Carson Wentz. And I use Fantasy Pros ADP projections, which are pretty complete. But they had Wentz going 6th overall right now at the quarterback position. But he has the 5th easiest schedule for quarterbacks as it stands right now. I know that a lot can happen between now and September, so the strength of schedule might shift a little bit. But as it is right now, he is top 5 easiest. And, obviously a lot's going to depend on how healthy he comes back from that injury. But they don't have an onslaught of tough defenses, particular pass defenses to go against. I think another year in his development, the weapons he has at his disposal there. I just think that Carson Wentz takes another step forward, and I believe you named Cam Newton as number 5, and I know that Cam Newton brings a certain element of the game with the run game. I'm just not a big Cam Newton believer, and I just think that offense is definitely a bit of a mess, and I know he can do it with his feet, but I think that's a guy that Carson Wentz could potentially leap and at least move into the top 5, if not higher, this season.
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. Carson Wentz was basically running away with the MVP candidacy last year, and I think, he still finished, I think, as a QB1, even though he missed a bunch of games at the end of the season. So I can definitely buy into Carson Wentz. It's just going to be, the hesitation behind him is obviously the injury, and people might be hesitant, but I think, looking at, Deshaun Watson, played in less games, had a very similar injury. Obviously, Deshaun Watson's was earlier in the season, but you see a guy like Watson going as a second quarterback overall, and he's played like 4 games, whereas Wentz has played, almost 2 full seasons and has shown steady improvement. So I can see Carson Wentz finishing top 5 for sure. He was on pace to basically be the number 1 quarterback last year. So I do expect, though, like with his weapons, I'm not a huge Alshon guy, but he does kind of spread the ball out. Do you think that, who of the Eagles, so, obviously, do you think that, with Carson Wentz finishing in the top 5, do you think he's going to have a main guy that he's going to really, feed targets to, or is it going to be kind of more of the same? Obviously, his Ertz there, too. Who's, your skill player that you think is going to really help Wentz kind of get there?
Yeah, so from a fantasy perspective, Ertz would be the guy I'd be the highest on. But as far as just overall philosophy, what it's going to look like in Philadelphia, for me, I think he's going to spread the ball. I think he's going to use the backside of the backfield. Obviously, Ertz is going to factor in. I think Nelson Aguilar takes another step this year. I don't think it makes him really fantasy viable, except for maybe in a deep week where you have multiple buys. And I think Aguilar's, and I don't have it in front of me, but his ADP from I think I've done about 25 best ball drafts so far, and a handful of mock drafts. And Nelson Aguilar, every single time, is going way too high and way too rich for my blood in the group of guys that he's around. I'd rather have some of those other guys. So, I don't think fantasy-wise that anybody. Alshon, I think, is going to be the number 1 receiving target, but I would expect him to be a high-end receiving 2. If you go really running back heavy, I think if you get him, number 1, and you have guys like Randall Cobb, whose value is almost bafflingly low, and you can get somebody like that as your third receiver and then get a good number 2 guy that you can patch it together enough for the receiving core, that would make sense. But I think that they're going to be more of an even distribution, and Ertz is viable because he's one of the more talented tight ends in the tight end position. Feels as weak as ever right now.
Yeah, no, I like that take for sure. I think he's going to spread it out. The Eagles' offense, it's got a lot of weapons, so I like that take. Moving to my quarterback that I think is going to enter the top 5, and it's a name that's kind of associated with the top 5, and it's Drew Brees. So it comes surprising because for the most part people will be like, oh well, Drew Brees is probably already that's like an easy pick. Quick question for you, Ryan. In Drew Brees' career, so in 15 seasons, he's played at least 15 games or more. How many times has he finished as a QB5 overall or better? In 15 seasons, how many of those seasons has he finished as a QB5 or better?
I'm going to go, because I feel like it's probably in the middle, but I'm going to go high and go against my instinct here and say 12.
It's 8. So you should have followed your brain.
I should have gone in the middle. Right
yeah, no, really,
that's on me for not trusting my gut.
Right smack dab in the middle. So yeah, 8 times he's done it. He's finished in the top 5. Most recently, he's done it. I think it was 2 years ago. But essentially, you look at last year, and the Saints, obviously huge running game last year. Ingram, Kamara, really kind of adapted, but a lot of that had to do with, I think, kind of just how the offense kind of molded. So you had, Willie Snead got suspended, right to start off the year. So already they were down kind of their number 2 wide receiver. And so Brees finished the season with, under 400 completions, under 600 attempts for the first time since 2009. But at the same time, he also had a career high in completion percentage, and he also helped the Saints lead the NFL in passing plays over 20 yards. So it wasn't like he was just dinking and dunking down the field. He was throwing it down the field, whether it was Ted Ginn, Michael Thomas, Kamara, making plays. So there were still big plays from the offense, despite the fact that it was kind of a lesser passing volume. So I see the Saints offense as a example of positive regression. I don't think that this is the new norm, because Brees has as a talent, from what I'm the statistics I'm reading and watching him, he hasn't dropped off. From a talent perspective, he just wasn't asked to do as much in the passing game based on the fact that they were running the ball so effectively. It's like, okay, why change it? But now you throw the wrinkle in with Mark Ingram. Okay, he's suspended for 4 games. I am not a Mark Ingram believer this season. I think that he's going to come back to a role that's not very specific to him. He's a free agent after this year. I could totally see them, kind of phasing him out of the offense. I could see them trading him before week 6, because they have a bye week 5 or they have a bye week 6, so he'll come back week 5, and then they'll have a bye week the next week. So it's like you're going to be missing him for the first 6 games of the year, essentially. That's over half the regular season in fantasy. And if you're holding on to Mark Ingram, just waiting for it to happen, I think it's a waste of a roster spot, to be honest. And I just think that they're going to be able to pass them more effectively. Kamara is a pass-catching running back. Michael Thomas, top 5 wide receiver. They play in a dome. They have Drew Brees. I love Drew Brees. I just wish that I wish he didn't have his name brand, because I think he's dropping. But still, he's going to go decently high still in redraft because, he's Drew Brees. He's good. But even though he wasn't that good last year. So it's not taking effect that he kind of struggled last year in terms of just fantasy production. And I wish it kind of took more of a hit. So his value's not the greatest where you're getting him, but I still think that he has a really good chance of finishing top 5. And the argument against it is kind of, the Saints defense is a lot better. Well, that's true, but at the same time, this Saints defense still, last year they allowed the 7th most passing attempts, and they allowed the 14th most passing yards. So it's not like, the Saints is going to shut down everybody, and then the Saints are just going to run the ball 40 times a game. I don't envision that happening. I can see them playing in shootouts. I can see them playing, they're not a shutdown defense. They're a better defense, don't get me wrong, and I don't necessarily think Brees will throw for 5,000 yards for, the 6th time or whatever. But I do like Brees, and I think that he's kind of undervalued, and I think that people are sleeping on him a little bit in terms of just, oh, well, this is the new norm. He's old now. They're going to run the ball. But I think that you just look at the players that they have. I think that they're still going to continue to throw the ball.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. My only concern just with the Saints' overall offense, and maybe it'll make them lean on the pass game more, but I think that there's a lot of thought out there that, and you're obviously not an Ingram believer, and Ingram's been a very frustrating player as far as up and down seasons. But I just look at it and say that we know how good Alvin Kamara was last year, and there was no bigger proponent of Alvin Kamara than I was. From the preseason on last year, and I think I drafted him in 4 out of 5 leagues. So I held on to him even the first couple weeks when he had a slow start, when they had a crowded backfield. But for me, I just look at that whole offense and say it works so well with Kamara and Ingram that I think we're all just quickly assuming that Kamara with more of a workload is going to be a better producer. But we haven't really got to see that, because regardless of what you think of Ingram, they weren't able to key just on Kamara last year because both of them were so effective in both the run and pass game. So when you take half that equation out, I honestly wonder what it looks like for Alvin Kamara in the first 4 games, if he is as effective and as electric as he was last year, or if they struggle to run the ball a little bit more, if they can key on him as far as putting their best, coverage linebacker on him, and maybe that they can limit him a little bit more. And then while I think Ted Ginn is flying under the radar a little bit this year because of the year he had again last year, Ted Ginn's just a guy that I think is plagued by the drops he had early in his career, and people don't realize he's really turned into a pretty reliable and effective fantasy player. But if all of a sudden he has to become more of a focal point because they don't have any kind of a game coming out of the backfield. So I wouldn't, if you had to, if you put a gun to my head and made me pick, I'd say that Kamara is still good and still really effective without Ingram. I just think there's a little bit more of a question mark, and I think, again, people are just assuming, like, oh, Ingram's gone, that's good for Kamara. I mean, until I see it, I can't fully know that, I guess. And so that's my only hesitation. But overall, Brees is as consistent as they come, so I have no problem with somebody slotting him in their top 5 rankings.
Yeah, and I think, the thing with Kamara, too, before we move on, and it's like just kind of balancing the efficiency versus the volume. So everybody knows his efficiency is going to go down. It's impossible and that doesn't go down. Just like Deshaun Watson. It can't possibly not go down. But then again, but then he'll probably see, an increase in workload. Okay, that's fair. But then it's like kind of looking at that ratio. It's like, how does it all like balance out? And that's kind of like the unknown factor here with Alvin Kamara. But obviously, tons of talent and, a very... great weapon out of the backfield. And the last thing on Ingram, too, is just Ingram also has a second home in the Sean Payton doghouse. So that's another cause for concern for Ingram when he comes back. He was also on PEDs. Maybe that's why he was so good last year. I mean, it's not out of the question. He has a career year and then he gets popped for PEDs. I mean, he might not be that good anymore.
Fair point.
Cool. So we will move on to the next position, running back. So probably my favorite thing to talk about with fantasy football, because running backs are just that's the bread and butter. You get the best running back, and it's the number one way to win in fantasy. So Ryan, so who are you looking at for outside the top 5? So the consensus top 5, or at least the top 4. At ADPs right now. So Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson, Ezekiel Elliott, and then Kamara kind of comes in at number 5. But those top 4 are basically, slotted in there, and basically almost every draft, it seems like those guys are going in some type of order. So who do you kind of have slotted in, maybe jumping into that top 5, Ryan?
So I had 2 names written down, and I've decided I'm going to go with a more bold one here to keep this interesting. Before I get to that, I'll kind of just work through my thought process. I mean, the first guy I looked at was, I think, the obvious guy who's sitting at number 6 that a lot of people would say here, Saquon Barkley. And I don't, I actually, my second trial at P.F.F., I had to break down the Penn State bowl game. So I got to watch a lot of Barkley. Well, not a lot because he actually sat out a good portion of that game. But I got to really watch him up close and personal for the first time, and it's hard to not be impressed with him. But the Giants have a pretty hard schedule against the run this year. I think it was ranked like 26th or 27th right now. So he's going to face really stiff competition. I have a big thing of not believing in Eli Manning and thinking that he's cooked. So I just don't know how good that offense is going to be this year. The next one I went to was Fournette. That was more the safe answer. But I'm gonna jump back on the horse I was on last year, and I'm coming back with Dalvin Cook because I think Dalvin Cook would have been maybe Kamara with the way he played down the stretch. Turns out to be the best running back of the rookies in last year. But I had Dalvin Cook, and through the first 4 weeks, the guy was trending to be the best one. I believe he was the best running back out of the rookie class from the first 4 weeks last year. Obviously, that's an injury, and I think a lot of people are kind of counting him out because of that injury now. And I look at it, for a lot of the same reasons you liked, some of the, Brees there with the dome. He's in the dome. So 8 weeks a year, he's going to have really good, turf to run on. It's a brand new dome too. So I think that creates a faster track out there. You're going to have a better quarterback situation. And I'm not a huge Kirk Cousins guy, but I certainly believe in him more than Case Keenum and Sam Bradford. So you're going to have a better quarterback situation. I think some of those weapons developed on the outside. So there's going to be a lot around him. I think that's going to be a really good offense this year. Then you also have an elite defense. So you're not going to be in these situations where I think you're trailing a lot in the third or fourth quarter and you're just, chucking the ball up, which is a concern always with Fournette is that, well, it's a great defense in Jacksonville to, inopportune fumbles or pick sixes by Blake Bortles, which is never impossible. That could turn into a game where they're trailing, need to start throwing the ball more. So I think he's in the best position. To this day, he's still one of the most explosive guys I've seen in college. He's just one of those guys that can take a play, and obviously at any point a running back can break off a big chunk play. But Dalvin Cook's one of those guys that gets the ball, and he's almost in traffic, and it's almost like he's slowing down the game, and it looks like there's nowhere to go, and he's kind of bracing to go down, and then all of a sudden he just finds a seam, cuts, and goes. And that's in the passing game, the running game. I just think that in his ADP right now is 10. His ECR on Fantasy Pros is 10, so that's the consensus out there is he's the 10th best running back. And I just think there's definitely a little bit of an unknown, but I think it's a bias, and I love his skill set, and I love the situation he's in. I think he's going to get a lot of touches this year. I have no fear of Latavius Murray taking any touches. Jerick McKinnon's gone, so that's not somebody who's going to really factor in the passing game. I think he's going to be a three down back, workhorse, all the stupid cliches, and I think he puts up monster numbers this year, and I love his value at 10.
All right, there you have it. Dalvin Cook, top 5 running back. So I just want to, I love your, take on Cook. Definitely super talented. Definitely has that third, 3-down workhorse look. You said you weren't concerned about Latavius Murray. So for me, I'm not concerned about him, but I think that the Vikings might use Latavius Murray. I mean, he was pretty good last year. He was pretty productive, working with Jerick McKinnon. And last year, when Dalvin Cook was getting all the carries in the first 4 weeks, Latavius Murray was hurt. So he wasn't playing. So that they didn't really have anyone else to go to. So is there any reason why you don't think the Vikings will use Latavius Murray at all, especially like in the red zone? In the red zone, Latavius Murray had the 4th most red zone rushing attempts last year. That's a pretty big number. And to say that, oh no, they're going to give everything to Dalvin Cook, I'm not sure I can buy that necessarily because Murray was good. And if Cook is going to be playing the pass catching role as well as the first and second down role, I could definitely still see, Murray getting in, obviously to, take drives away, as opposed to like another, handcuff running back, because I don't think Latavius Murray is really that bad.
Yeah, I would. A couple things on that. We'll kind of work our way through it. I think Latavius Murray is that bad. I think that he's been in enough decent situations for him to have an elite year, and he hasn't. So, and when I say that bad, I mean just kind of average. I don't think that he's, for a lot of reasons he succeeded. I think Dalvin Cook will exceed more, and I think early on in the year, you're absolutely right. I think that they still will give Latavius Murray some touches. I just see kind of production out of Cook that eventually the hand is going to be forced, and it might be patience or stubbornness, but Zimmerman there is Mike Zimmer is he's very slow to change things up. So I do think that through the first 4 weeks and maybe even like 6 weeks that there could be some touches, siphoned away by Latavius Murray. But I just think Cook's going to have the kind of year where he forces their hand. And when you touched on just how much red zone, carries Latavius Murray got last year, I mean, they kind of had to. First of all, Stephon Diggs is not a red zone kind of guy. It's just this is not his skill set, and he's more of a deep take the top off kind of guy that can get you on vertical routes. So I don't think he has a huge red zone role. He's not the biggest guy in the world. Adam Thielen, I think last year it was like 17 targets he had in the red zone. He was in the top 10 in red zone targets last year, and I think it was like 17, and he only caught 7 of those balls out of 17. And I think that there's going to be a regression for Thielen because that's a really concerning stat for me. And on the flip side, Kyle Rudolph, I think, had just one less target with like 16, and he caught 13 of them. And I think there was like 2 or 3 touchdowns in there, something like that. So, really the only guy that they could rely on in the red zone was Kyle Rudolph. So I think by necessity more than anything, and him being the primary back last year with Cook down, that they had to feed Latavius Murray in the red zone. And when you have Cook back, I mean, I just, again, because I just think he's so versatile. I think he can be a speed back, but also a big back, and again, like I said, a catching back. So I just don't think that there's a role that Dalvin Cook can't excel at or succeed at. And so while there might be a role early on for Latavius Murray, I think eventually he and Cook ends up forcing their hand to say, okay, we just have to go with this guy because he does it all. And I think that he's going to help that offense because they just don't have, outside of Rudolph, who's a at best an average tight end, who's just like really the only big body there, that they're going to have to rely on Cook a lot for the red zone work. And maybe there's some times that they get the ball to Murray, but I'm not worried about overall him taking away too much from Cook.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. Cook is by far a much more dynamic running back than Latavius Murray is. He's basically as boring as you could be, but he's there still. And I have him in Dynasty League, so I'm hoping if Dalvin Cook can't come back healthy, hey there, I got a starting running back for a good offense. So I will now talk about my running back, who I'm actually really excited about, and I'm pretty much gonna move him into my top 3 running backs, and it's Melvin Gordon. So Melvin Gordon right now is going as the RB9, and realistically, it doesn't make a lot of sense. Look at the Chargers as a whole team, and this is a team that, has Super Bowl aspirations, I think, in terms of their defense, in terms of the offense that they have. You're kind of a very well-rounded team, and obviously it sucks that they already lost Hunter Henry. But if anything, it's better to lose those key players in the beginning of the year. Very, very early on, so you can adapt as opposed to, okay, week 6, okay, now we don't have Hunter Henry, which we have all these plays built out for him. Okay, now they can kind of move on and, not really feature the tight end and not really feature, Mike Williams, for example. But back to Melvin Gordon. So Melvin Gordon is the only player in the last 2 seasons to score at least 12 touchdowns. You don't see touchdowns as something that is consistent. Usually in fantasy, or really, scoring double-digit touchdowns back-to-back years is not something that happens a lot. With the running back position, it happens a little bit more, but specifically with Gordon, he's scored overall, at least 12 touchdowns the last 2 seasons. And the biggest thing with him, and kind of looking at the running backs overall, so the top 4 running backs the last 3 seasons, if you look at their average ADPs, so who was taken that season as a top 4 running back, and then who finished the season as a top 4 running back, 33% of running backs taken in the top 4 finished top 4. So, you talked about Dalvin Cook, obviously. So there's a really high chance, there's a better than half chance that 2 of these guys, David Johnson, Zeke Elliott, Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, that they don't finish top 4. And they're all going top 4, essentially. So when you have a later pick, and a lot of people are kind of shying away and being like, oh, I got to take a receiver if I don't get one of these top 4 guys, it's like, no, there are plenty of guys that you can take that have top 4 potential, top 5 potential, and like you said with Cook, and in my case, Melvin Gordon. So, Ryan, question for you. Last year, who do you think was a more efficient running back? Melvin Gordon or Le'Veon Bell?
Oh, by the way, you're setting up the question. I will take Melvin Gordon on this one.
So it was actually a trick question. It's the same. So and I'm basing this efficiency based on PPR points per touch. So what they did with the touch of the football. Alvin Kamara's PPR per touch was very high. Obviously, he was a very efficient running back. He had, I think it was around 1.15. So he was averaging 1 fantasy point per touch, which is crazy, or over 1 fantasy point. So Melvin Gordon averaged 0.84 PPR fantasy points per touch, which was the same as Le'Veon Bell. The biggest knock on Melvin Gordon, it seems like everyone's like, oh, he's inefficient. Oh, he's not efficient. 4 yards per carry, or he's under 4 yards per carry, which is like the only argument I always hear about him. And for me, yards per carry is not the best term, the best statistic of success, because a lot of it has to do with red zone work, where Melvin Gordon had 49 red zone rushing attempts last year, which ranked in the top 3. So when you rush in the red zone, you're limited to the amount of yards you can gain, which hurts your yards per carry. So I did a little bit more digging, looked at, okay, what's Melvin Gordon's yards per carry inside the 20s? So excluding the red zone. And what did you know? It's 4.25. You know what Le'Veon Bell's was? 4.26. So it's just, he's not as, look, he's not the most efficient running back in the NFL. I'm not saying that. But to say he's inefficient is just not an accurate statement to me. Looking at some of these numbers here, and he keeps matching to Le'Veon Bell. And Le'Veon Bell, compared to his career averages last year, was a down year for him in terms of his yards per carry and things like that. But still, if you're getting a running back that has numbers similar to Le'Veon Bell and you say he's inefficient when Le'Veon Bell's a top 3 running back every year, it's like, wait, what? What are you saying? So that's kind of my start with Melvin Gordon. I'm very into Melvin Gordon. But the other things with him, and kind of I looked at basically, what it takes to be a top 3 running back. So I took the averages of the last 2 seasons, because 2015 was a total ditch in terms of running back position. That was when Devontae Freeman finished first, but his point total was super low. It just was a really bad year for running backs. So I looked at the averages, and this is what I kind of came up. So the average rushing attempts was 266 rushing yards, just over 1,244, 91 targets, 70 receptions, 688 receiving yards, and 15 total touchdowns. That's what the average was for top 3 running backs the past 2 seasons. So obviously, receptions was pretty high. And touchdowns is obviously a big number there. If you're that top back, you need to score double-digit touchdowns. Something that Melvin Gordon's done basically the last 2 seasons. He scored 12 touchdowns. So the things that I see kind of increasing for Melvin Gordon, even though he finished as an RB5 last year, which just seems like no one remembers. So the 2 main things that will kind of get him to that next level are, if he can increase his running back efficiency even more, and his increase in the passing game. So the Chargers have made upgrades on their offensive line, something that has been not good for Melvin Gordon, which has kind of, I'm doing air quotes here, has kind of influenced his inefficiencies. The Chargers' offensive line last year managed 1.37 yards per contact per rushing attempt. 3rd worst in the NFL. So Melvin Gordon never had a chance to friggin' run the ball because he was getting hit behind the line of scrimmage, or very, very early on. Luckily for Gordon, he forced 66 missed tackles via Pro Football Focus. Shout out to, the other job, which was 2nd most in the NFL. So he was very elusive. He's a good running back. He makes plays out of nothing. And he has explosive qualities. So I can see that improvement with the offensive line. They're getting back Russell Okung, or again, he's coming back. He was their best lineman last year. They're getting back Forrest Lamp, who missed all of last year, so he's another upgrade, and Mike Pouncey from the Dolphins. We saw 2 years ago with the Falcons when they signed Alex Mack as their center, and how much it impacted that running game, and how much of a difference it made for the quarterback. And that was one of the most explosive offenses ever. So I'm just saying, this is something that you could see, these small upgrades to the line can really make a big difference in the long term for the running back that's already established himself as a top 5 running back. He's already produced at an elite level. And I think this is the year he takes that next step. I mentioned Hunter Henry, Antonio Gates. Those guys are both gone. And with that, that's 25 red zone targets gone. Along with 25 red zone targets gone. And then 25 red zone targets, 116 total targets. There's more room for receiving yards, receptions for Melvin Gordon. And they've been talking him up in the receiving game. They want to get him more involved in the passing game. And Melvin Gordon, year after year, his first three seasons, all he has done is increase his passing role in the offense. He's increased his receptions, he's increased receiving yards, he's increased receiving touchdowns. Every single year has gone up, and there's no reason why it doesn't continue to increase as he goes into his fourth year. 100 targets, he had 83 last year. 100 targets is not out of the realm of possibilities. And when you look at, his yards per catch and, look at his rushing attempts from last year, I statted it all out. And basically what it came to was a final production of 311 fantasy points, which matched up exactly with a very similar stat line to Le'Veon Bell from 2016. So finishing as a top 3 running back is not out of the question for Melvin Gordon. If he sees an increase in the passing game, which there's no reason why that's not going to happen. And if he, has a slight increase in rushing efficiency, which with an improved offensive line is definitely more than, capable of happening. I'm done with Melvin Gordon. Ryan, let me hear it. Let me hear it.
Yeah. No, so I mean, not to disagree with you, but I'd echo a lot of those thoughts. I think that there's definitely a viewership bias is what I would say, and it just. I think the general part of the country doesn't catch a lot of LA Chargers games, and for that reason, that people just, like you said, look at a quick stat with Melvin Gordon and are quick to dismiss him. You talked about that. Obviously, his yards per carry is down and affected because of how many red zone attempts he gets. With the 25 missing red zone, targets from last year that they have to replace, you're going to lean on your running back in the red zone, and a lot of times on your tight end. So when you take, your 2 best tight ends from last year and really have a big hole in tight end now, I think it's reasonable to assume that a lot more that'll fall on Melvin Gordon's shoulders. If he does increase in the passing game, then there's no reason he can't be a top 3 guy. And, one thing I was recently looking at was going through and just trying to really define what makes a good what makes an RB1, just kind of breaking it down just to the simplest form. And when I was going through, it kind of started from listening to the late round pod by JJ Zachariason, and he was mentioning some similar trends. And the trend that I found is that whether it's standard or PPR, I think it was like 80-something% of the time, it's a guy that isn't in a committee, so he has a heavy workload, and that has a really good offense around him. And I kind of called it at the end of it my reasons to not draft LaShawn McCoy or Kenyon Drake, because and while LaShawn McCoy's done it, he's like the one guy who consistently is in the top 12 running backs on an offense that stinks. Everybody else is like on a top end offense. So San Diego's offense is going to be good this year. They're not going to be trailing a lot because that's one of the best defenses in football with Bosa and Ingram and the secondary they built there with Casey Howard. Or Hayward. So they have again, that kind of that setup for what creates an effective running back, which is a good offense. He is the guy. He's going to get a lot of touches. Not that anyone wish bad on Hunter Henry, but that does, I think, drive up Melvin Gordon's stock the most. I think there's still some question marks outside of Keenan Allen, which he's also always a question because of his health. And he seems to come up with a different freak injury every year. So I think it's reasonable to expect that a lot's going to fall on Melvin Gordon's shoulders. And quietly, he's been that guy that's put a lot on his shoulders in LA or San Diego to start, and then LA in his career. So I'm also very high on Melvin Gordon. Again, I think there's between him and guys like David Johnson, because he's injured, it's just, again, Dalvin Cook, who I mentioned, it's just people, if you don't see somebody for a while, people forget. And, especially for me, I kind of discount Melvin Gordon sometimes until I go and dig on it, because in the Northeast, I have the red zone and I get the couple local games, and unless the Chargers in the red zone, I don't get to see a lot of what he's doing on a week in, week out basis. But when you really dig into it, he's one of the most one of the best and most effective running backs in the game, and he's in a really, really good situation in LA this year.
It's all about LA. First was LeBron. It's gonna be Melvin Gordon. It's gonna be a huge LA year across the board.
Big LA year.
Cool. So let's get into receivers. So I struggled a little bit picking mine, so I am looking forward to seeing who you've picked, Ryan.
Yeah, so mine's pretty boring. I think there's a lot of hype around the receivers. I mean, the receiver was probably the hardest one to do for me because like you said, you had a hard time. I feel like everyone's pretty accurately slotted right now. So, and then a couple guys that I looked at first. One being like AJ Green. I mean, they have an insanely, again from the Fantasy Pros list I was looking at. I think they have the 27th hardest. Or the 27th least favorable matchup for receivers this season. So to bank on AJ Green rising from 7 into the top 5 was like banking on Andy Dalton and over helping them overcome a pretty tough schedule in the passing game. So I ultimately went with Devontae Adams. If he from what I had his ADP, I had the list I looked at had him at 7, and so I mean. I did see a couple lists where he was 5, but I went with the one where I saw him going 7 just so I could have somebody to say on this list. So, because again, I think they're all pretty accurately slotted. I just think that he's a guy that, it's going to depend a lot on Aaron Rodgers' health. I do think Randall Cobb has a good season this year, so that'll probably take a little bit away. But I just think that Devontae is the main guy to go to there. I questioned kind of last year how much he could emerge as the top guy in Green Bay, and he obviously proved me wrong. Had a really effective season last year, and for a deeper round name to try to throw a little interest in this part of the podcast here, I'm going to stick with a guy who I've been a fan of since his rookie season. I've been touting all year, but for a real long shot, if you're getting a good payout on the odds in Vegas, if Andrew Luck is healthy and looks like the guy he used to, T.Y. Hilton, at his best and at Andrew Luck's best, is a top 5 wide receiver in the game, especially in a fantasy perspective. Just an electric combination. Probably asking a lot for that to happen this year, but if you're looking for more of a buzzworthy, interesting name there, I'd go T.Y.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the boring name. So I actually had AJ Green as mine. So, and it was hard because I was like, for the same reason you kind of like were hesitant on him, you're like moving up from 7 to 5, and I was trying to think, okay, so AJ Green finished as a 4th overall and 5th overall in his 2nd and 3rd year. And I was trying to see like compare those teams and basically be like, all right, what does it have to take for him to finish as a top 5 receiver? And essentially, it's going to take at least probably around 30 touchdowns from Andy Dalton. So when I kind of thought about that, I'm just like, ugh, like, am I really gonna bank on Andy Dalton throwing 30 touchdowns? Like, that might be hard for me to really really believe that that's gonna happen. So that's like partially why I was hesitant. But I looked again, at those rosters specifically, and kind of two things point out to me. So the years that Andy Dalton was actually productive, Andy Dalton actually finished as quarterback 5 once. It's crazy. But that was the year that he had Mohamed Sanu, he had AJ Green, and he had Marvin Jones. That was the year Marvin Jones caught 10 touchdowns. So and what that's kind of what they've been missing. So you saw those two guys leave, most Sanu and Jones, 2 years ago, and last year, and they kind of struggled. The last 2 years, they've kind of struggled without secondary receivers. They've had Brandon LaFell, who's been okay. But they've lacked that type of dynamic, deep threat, speed guy, John Ross, to get on the field. So I really think that Green, if he takes that next step, it's actually going to be because of the things around him. It's really not on him. Like, he in a vacuum is a top 5 wide receiver, no doubt. But it's Dalton, and it's guys, creating more opportunities for him. John Ross. If John Ross can, not obviously be Marvin Jones and catch 10 touchdowns, but like be that deep threat on the other side, make it easier because the red zone work is all going to be all AJ Green. Obviously with the running backs mixed in, but get it, mix in. Oh my God, this is too good.
Good fun.
On the fly, swear to God. But the other thing is there's no Tyler Eifert, or I'm just gonna assume he's not gonna play. I mean, he's got a back injury, and he's been a big red zone guy and is taking touchdowns away from Green. So he's probably not going to be, there based on his injury history. So red zone is going to be all Green. Once again, Green in the end zone. Money. But yeah, I think AJ Green, it's possible. There's a narrative for it to happen, but it does rely on Andy Dalton. And then the other guy I was thinking about was, and also before we get off the Bengals, they have a better offensive line. Finally, they have an offensive line that can maybe give Dalton time to throw down the field. So I do like, hopefully that the offense can. I think the offense will be better as a whole. So I think that could benefit Green, and he might get that slight bump. But the other guy I was looking at was Doug Baldwin. And he was my first guy I thought about putting in because I was like, oh, man, he's going to get so many targets. Like, he's just going to feast. But then, I looked at it because I remember he had that crazy year where he got 14 touchdowns. That year, he finished as the wide receiver 7. So even in a year where he caught 14 touchdowns, he still wasn't able to crack the top 5. And that wasn't necessarily because receivers were down that year overall. It was just or the receivers were better that year. It's just... His just total yardage is never really that high. He didn't even hit 1,000 yards last year. And where I do like him, especially where he's going in drafts, I don't think Baldwin has enough firepower, with that offense to be a top 5 wide receiver. And I went into it very he's going to get all the volume. I think he'll be fine. But then I looked more at it. It's I don't think he really has it in him to be a top 5 receiver. Do you have any thoughts on Baldwin?
Yeah, so Baldwin was all, I agree with AJ Green and everything he said. I was supposed to pick in him. The first thing that scared me off, or the thing that scared me off about Baldwin was the same thing with AJ Green, which is just that they just have a really tough schedule. I think they were neck and neck with Cincinnati, one of the top 6-7 worst schedules for receivers in fantasy this year. So it's going to be a bit of a gauntlet. And I mean, who's helping them? Right? I mean,
yeah,
they've shipped off so many pieces there. There's going to be a lot of attention paid to Doug Baldwin, and he's no longer really a secret, and especially, again, you're going to go into these games, and I know people are really high on Rashad Penny. I just don't think it's going to be really a good situation for him there, because I perceive a lot of games where they're going to be down big, and, they're in an absolute rebuild. We talked about this in the football garbage time last night. And I know that he probably wasn't going to be the same guy, and they tried to prepare for life without him. But Cam Chancellor just signifies the end of that defense and that era in Seattle. So I think they're going to be down late a lot, and who else you keying on? So it's kind of a double-edged sword of the fact that I think that we'll see a lot of games where he's struggling in the first half and maybe in the first half of the third quarter, and then they'll be down a couple scores, and Russell Wilson will do his magician trick back there, and he'll feed the ball to Doug Baldwin because he has nobody else to throw it to, and so Baldwin will end up getting points. But I think it'll be similar to that season where he'll be the number 1 guy, and if he's, if he's your absolute number 1 guy, the philosophy I've kind of developed going through the draft this year so far is just you want to load up on running backs because there's so many middle. If you have 2 or 3 wide receiver 2s, I think you can get by. And while he may finish as a wide receiver 1, I still don't think he's the elite guy you want leading a receiving core. But I think he'll be effective. So there's a chance he could jump up if somehow he can get the yards put together and the touchdowns, because the target's going to have to be there for Doug Baldwin this year. I just wonder what it's going to look like when it's literally all on him and Russ, and they're in games that aren't kind of the normal games that they're used to, where they're good physical, closely contested games. If that changes any sort of the dynamic for those two.
Yeah, it definitely. It's gonna be. You'll be in a situation where you're facing an opponent. The Seahawks will be playing on Sunday Night Football, and you'll be like, I'm up big. He's done nothing this half. You go to bed at halftime or whatever. Doug Baldwin has 2 catches for 8 yards, and then you wake up the next day. He's got 3 touchdowns. You're just like, no.
Yeah, That's exactly how it's gonna. He's gonna be a monster second half. It's gonna be like, oh, what was it? Like the first year Allen, the would have been like 2015 or 2016 Allen Robinson.
Oh yeah.
Where the Jaguars were just an absolute puddle, but Allen Robinson was going off for. Then the same thing. You'd have 2 catches, 12 yards, no touchdowns in the first half, and then you turn the game back and he's got 2-3 touchdowns and 100 yards, and the Jaguars are still down by 14. But Allen Robinson all of a sudden had the best day in the NFL. So yeah, I see a similar situation. It's just, again, just because of how tough their schedule is, I just wonder how much he's going to be able to do and how much that team gets shut down this year.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll soon see. So wrapping up here, tight ends. So the top 5 tight ends ADP are as follows. You've got Gronk, Kelsey, Ertz, Olsen, and Jimmy Graham. So of the tight end position, which we all love, it's like tight end roulette every week. It's a fun game. You never know who's going to go off and who's going to totally, crap your team. Ryan, so who are you looking at tight end of some guy you could think can finish the top 5?
Yeah, so the name I had is the guy who is often overlooked, and I had Delanie Walker. Sorry, brain fart there for a second, but Delanie Walker.
That's what I was going to guess. I was like, super overlooked, Delanie Walker, definitely.
8.2, guy produces every single season. I think that offense is better than it's been in a while. I think Deion Lewis will help in the passing game. And again, a huge barometer that I really look at is obviously target share, but that you have to be in a good offense, in my opinion. To the guys who perform in bad offenses are the outlier; they're not the rule. So I think he's in a good situation this year. I think that offense takes a step forward. I think that their defense is going to not have him in a situation where he's going to get a ton of garbage time points, but I think he'll be consistent quarter to quarter. He's routinely a top end tight end who again just gets overlooked. And to go back to the strength of schedule again, the Titans have the 4th easiest matchup for tight ends this year. So he's going to be playing teams that aren't at least slotted right now to cover the tight end well. And this is a guy who just performs every season. So not the sexiest name, but Delanie Walker is continually a top end tight end option for you, and that's why I like to move up. And I'm only banking on him moving up 4 spots here, so it's not
groundbreaking. Yeah, I like it. I like Delanie Walker. I actually have Delanie Walker in a dynasty league with another tight end that I actually picked as my breakout. Or not breakout, but break into the top 5, and it's Kyle Rudolph. And I actually read an article from goingfor2.com. So this was written by at Reynolds St58, and basically he wrote this article. Basically, hey, I think Kyle Rudolph can finish as top 3 tight end. And I was like, all right, I'm kind of interested by that. Let me read it. And the biggest thing, is if you look at the top 5 tight ends. Almost all of them are injury prone to some, or have been hurt, and it's just the tight end position is so everyone gets hurt all the time. I mean, it takes if Gronk goes down, all right, there's a spot opened up. If Ertz gets hurt, spot opened up. Graham spot the tight end position itself is just seems like guys are going down left and right. So the biggest thing with this player, with Kyle Rudolph, is he's played all 16 games the last 3 seasons. Which was shocking to me because I could have sworn he didn't play in the game last year, but I think it was that game he was ruled doubtful, and then the doubtful automatically means they're not going to play because then they had the whole questionable thing and they had probable as a injury jurisdiction, which made no sense because it was okay, he's just going to play, and they changed it. And I remember he was doubtful, so I got to take him out, but then for the first time ever, a player went from doubtful to oh, he's actually going to play. He feels great today. So Kyle Rudolph has been pretty durable. Kirk Cousins is the new quarterback there, and Kirk Cousins loves targeting the tight ends. You saw what he did with Jordan Reed. You saw what he did with Vernon Davis in Washington. So a lot of targets to the tight end position, and Kyle Rudolph has been a solid tight end. You look at his numbers the last couple of years. He's caught at least 57 passes the last 2 years, 7 touchdowns, and had 80 targets. So he produces at a steady pace, and realistically, he could probably just produce the same numbers he's kind of been putting up the last couple of years, and he could easily finish top 5 if one of those other guys just happens to, get hurt, which is often sometimes more likely than not. So I actually really like Kyle Rudolph, and I think he's kind of going in a similar range of Delanie Walker. So I think that's kind of like after those two guys, that's kind of where there's like that significant fall off. But these two guys kind of fall in a different category where they're not like the elite status, but they're still like established veterans that like can be started on a consistent basis.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you mentioned his games played. You went back 3 years. I mean, if you look at his entire career, there was the 2 bad years in 2013, 2014. But, from beginning to end, starting in 2011, it's 15, 16, 8, 9, 16, 16, 16. And like you said, that's unheard of for a guy who's playing, in the tight end position where you have to block and have all that contact nonstop. And he's a guy whose touchdown numbers have gone up the last 3 years, 5, 7, 8. And then, he had 9 in 2012. So, he is a guy that might be a little bit touchdown dependent at times, but he's not a huge touchdown regression candidate. And as I mentioned earlier, when I was digging up on a little bit on Kyle Rudolph earlier this season or this offseason, I mean, he's a guy last year who's targeted 17 times or 16 times, whatever it was in the red zone. And again, it was like 13 or 14 receptions. And he had 2 or 3 incompletes targeted to him in the red zone. And then I think it was like 4 or 5 of his touchdowns, or somewhere between 3 to 5 of his touchdowns came from there. So it's just, this is a guy who is consistently on the field, who's consistently a red zone target, who when you target him in the red zone, chances are he's bringing the ball in. And yeah, like you said, you have Kirk Cousins who's going to, the fact that Kirk Cousins is going to find out what it's like to have a tight end who plays more than 3 weeks
90
and has a mysterious
seconds.
finger injury and then disappears for 4 weeks. I'm very, very high. I think the Vikings take a little regression as a team because I think the defense was exposed a little bit last year, but that offense, I'm high on that offense right now. I think Thielen regresses. I think the defense regresses, but I think Stephon Diggs stays consistent, and I think Dalvin Cook and Kyle Rudolph are in for a big uptick, and they're at an uptick at the quarterback position. So, Kyle Rudolph, like you said, where he's going, if you want to load up on running backs in the first
60
2 rounds,
seconds.
and then load up on receivers and running backs, and then wait till like the 7th or 8th round, I've been able to consistently get Kyle Rudolph in the 7th or 8th round, and I think he could absolutely perform as a top 5 guy.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And Kyle Rudolph is a guy I'm trying to target in the Scott Fish Bowl because it's a tight end premium, and I don't want to necessarily go after a guy like Gronk or Kelsey really early on. So it's kind of my strategy is really figuring out where to get Rudolph, and then even if I take him around earlier, I still feel like I'm going to get good value for him in the Scott Fish Bowl draft. So we are counting down to the mere seconds. I'm getting a bunch of notifications saying that we have 90, 60 seconds left. So we're wrapping it up here. Ryan, just if you want to give your shout-outs to where people can find your work, and we can wrap it up.
10 seconds.
So just follow me on Twitter, @RyanWhitfieldNE. I post incessantly. You'll see all my content on there and links to it. Andrew, thanks for having me on there.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Talk to you guys soon. Later. Dope. All right, sweet.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.